Hi everyone, and welcome to today's video. I'm Anil Tamirano, and this is my YouTube channel, Empowering Teachers Worldwide. Today, we are going to dive into a topic that can really transform the way you engage your students: fat and skinny questions. If you have ever asked a question in class and got a one-word answer or worse, just silent, this video is for you. We'll explore the concept of fat and skinny questions, why they matter in the EFL classroom, the power of divergent questions, the challenges that students face when answering fat questions, and how you can support them both in and out of the classroom. Plus, I'll share some concrete strategies you can use to help your primary school EFL students or your secondary school EFL students practice answering fat questions outside the class. So, let's get started. Now, questioning is a natural feature of communication, but it's also one of the most important tools that we have as teachers. While questioning can be an effective tool, there is both an art and science to asking questions. So let's take a moment to think about why questions are so important in teaching. They are not just ways to test knowledge. They actually drive the conversation, encourage students to think critically, and help them engage with the material on a deeper level. And this is especially true in an EFL classroom, where our primary goal is to get students to use the language in meaningful ways. So, what's the difference between fat and skinny questions? Skinny questions are the ones that ask for factual information or short answers. They are useful in checking basic understanding, but they don't require much thought beyond that. For example, if I ask, what's the capital of France? Or when did World War II end? Or who wrote Romeo and Juliet? These questions are important for checking comprehension, but they don't do much to promote deeper thinking. Think of skinny questions as a warm-up. They get your students thinking, but they shouldn't take up most of your lesson. If your question is easily answered by a quick Google search, then it's probably a skinny question. Now, let's talk about fat questions. These are the ones that require higher order thinking. Fat questions can't be answered with a simple fact or a single word. They encourage students to analyze, evaluate, and even create something new. For example, suppose that we say, in what ways does Romeo and Juliet reflect issues in society that are still relevant today? That's much more than asking who wrote Romeo and Juliet, or what is Romeo and Juliet about? So fat questions are great because they open doors to more complex language use and deeper conversations. They allow students to express their opinions, justify their thoughts, and practice using English in meaningful ways. Fat questions help learners to think more and use more language than skinny ones. So they are especially great for CLIL. The best questions are those that are divergent or open-ended, in that they are broad and may have multiple answers and require higher level of thinking from students. Open-ended questions are ideal for developing skills such as inferring, predicting, verifying, and summarizing, as well as eliciting more language. Now, let's dive a little deeper into this type of that question that is particularly powerful in our classrooms. Divergent questions. They are the open-ended questions, and they don't typically have a single correct answer. Instead, they encourage students to explore multiple possibilities, think creatively, and express their own opinion and ideas. They are invaluable in language learning because they prompt students to use more complex language, structures, and vocabulary. So, open-ended or divergent questions have multiple answers. Unlike convergent or closed questions that have one correct answer, divergent questions may have many valid responses, and this encourages students to think broadly and creatively. They promote higher order thinking. They require students to analyze, evaluate, or create, which are the higher order thinking skills according to Bloom's taxonomy. They establish personal connections. They often ask students to draw on their own experiences, opinions, or feelings, making the language learning more personal and meaningful. They encourage discussion. Because there are multiple possible answers, they naturally lead to rich discussions and debates among students. And of course, they promote language production, because answering divergent questions requires students to produce more language, helping them practice and improve their English skills. So, let's have a look at some examples of divergent questions and how they differ from convergent questions. For example, we have this convergent question. What is the capital of Japan? How can we change it into a divergent question? For example, if you could design a new capital city for Japan, what would it be like and why? Convergent question. When did World War II end? Change it to, or develop it into, how do you think the world would be different if World War II had ended differently? And who wrote Romeo and Juliet? We move on to, how might Romeo and Juliet be different if it were written in today's world? So, as you can see, we can start with a convergent question, but then we move on to divergent questions to promote deeper thinking. All right, so let's talk about how to effectively incorporate these kind of questions into our lessons. First, start with a warm-up. Begin the lesson with a divergent question related to the topic. This gets students thinking and talking right from the beginning. For example, if you're going to teach about environmental issues, you might ask, if you could solve one environmental problem, what would it be and why? You can use think, pair, share. After posing a divergent question, you give students time to think individually and then discuss with a partner. Finally, they can share with the whole class. This scaffolding helps students build confidence in their answers, and they are particularly useful for those students who are shy or less confident in using English. Also, you can create question chains. Start with a divergent question, then follow up with more questions based on student responses. This creates a natural flow of conversation and helps students dig deeper into the topic. Encourage elaboration. When a student gives a short answer to a question, prompt them to expand their thoughts. For example, can you tell me more about that? Why do you think so? You can use visual prompts. Sometimes a picture or a short video clip can be a great starting point for divergent questions. Show an interesting image and ask, what do you think is happening in this picture? What do you think happened just before this? What do you think will happen? Integrate with reading and listening activities. After a reading or listening exercise, use divergent questions to encourage deeper engagement with the materials. For example, how might this story be different if it were set in your country? And finally, promote peer questioning. Teach students to ask each other these divergent questions. This not only helps them practice forming questions, but also encourages more student-to-student interaction. While divergent questions are powerful tools, they can present some challenges, of course. Let's have a look at some common issues and how to address them. For example, silent students. Some students may be hesitant to answer divergent questions because they are afraid of giving the wrong answer. So, create a classroom culture where all ideas are valued. Praise students for their efforts and their creativity, and not just for correctness. Lower level students might struggle to express complex ideas because they have limited language skills. So provide sentence starters, word banks that will help students structure their responses. You can also allow students to use a mix of English and their native language, gradually increasing the amount of English that they use. We also have some dominating students. Okay. Use techniques like round robin or talking chips to ensure that all students have a chance to contribute. Time management is always an issue, so discussions that are sparked by divergent questions can sometimes run longer than planned. So set clear limits for time discussions and use techniques like the 1-minute paper where students quickly jot down their thoughts before sharing. And finally, sometimes responses to divergent questions can veer off topic. So, while it's good to allow for some flexibility, gently guide the discussions back to the main topic. You can say something like, okay, that's an interesting point. How does it relate to our original question? Now, one question that often comes up when using divergent questions is, how do I assess the responses? Since there is no single correct answer to this, traditional assessment methods might not work. And here are some approaches that you might consider. First of all, rubrics. Create a rubric that assesses aspects like creativity, depth of thought, use of relevant vocabulary, and grammatical accuracy. Have students evaluate each other's responses. Peer assessment not only takes some of the assessment burden off, but also encourages students to think critically about what makes a good response. Invite students to reflect on their own responses. They could write about what they learned from the question or how they might improve their answers. Sometimes, especially with lower level students, the act of attempting to answer and participate is what's more important. Recognize and reward effort and improvement. And use students' responses as a starting point for a writing task or a project. This allows you to assess their ideas more thoroughly. Remember, the goal of using divergent questions is not just to get a correct answer, but to encourage thinking, creativity, and language use. And your assessment should reflect these goals. Now that we have explored divergent questions in depth, let's broaden our focus back to FAT questions in general. And there are a few common challenges that students, especially English as a foreign language students, face when answering FAT questions. Let's go over some of those challenges. They might give short, surface level answers because they haven't developed the skills to think more deeply yet. They may have limited vocabulary. To answer FAT questions, students need to use more complex language, which can be tough if they have a limited range of vocabulary. They might understand the question but struggle to express themselves. Fear of giving the wrong answer. FAT questions don't always have a single correct answer, but students might not realize this. They might hesitate to contribute because they are afraid of being wrong or judged by their peers. Difficulty organizing thoughts. FAT questions often require students to organize their ideas in a logical way. This can be hard, especially in a second language classroom. They might have good ideas, but struggle to express them clearly. And finally, for EFL students, the language barrier can be a real obstacle. They might understand the question conceptually, but have trouble putting their thoughts together in English. So, how can we help our students overcome these challenges? Let's have a look at some strategies that you can use to encourage them to answer FAT questions effectively. First, provide sufficient wait time. After asking a FAT question, pause for 5 seconds, 6 seconds. Give your students time to think before calling on them to answer. This helps them process their thoughts and come up with more complex responses. Model how to answer FAT questions. Show students how to break down a FAT question by modeling your own responses. For example, if the question is, why are trees important? You can demonstrate how to answer by saying, okay, I think trees are important because they provide oxygen, they give us shade, and help animals have a home. This gives them a structure to follow. Encourage group or pair discussions first. Have students discuss the FAT questions in pair or small groups before sharing their answers with the class. This gives them a chance to rehearse their ideas and feel more confident when speaking. Think, pair, share is a good technique for this. Provide sentence starters to help them structure their answers. For example, I think that because one reason is this is important because scaffolding cards are very useful for this. Celebrate multiple perspectives. FAT questions don't often have one right answer. So show your students that multiple perspectives are valuable by encouraging discussion and debate. You can say, that's an interesting point. Does anyone have a different idea? Now, let's look at a simple activity to help your students develop higher order thinking skills through good questions. Start by drawing a skinny question mark and ask a question that requires a short, factual answer. For example, what's the weather like today here? You have a very short answer. That's a skinny question. Then draw a fat question mark and ask a question or a couple of questions that require a longer, more elaborate answer. For example, is this weather normal for this time of the year? Has the climate changed in our country in recent years? Encourage students to discuss the differences between the two types of questions. Then put them into pairs and give them a text with a set of skinny questions. Ask them to change the skinny questions into fat questions. They should also write model answers on a separate sheet of paper. Next, form groups of 4 and ask pairs to exchange their questions and answer them. They can then discuss the answers and the differences between their responses. Now, let's talk about how students can practice answering that questions outside the classroom. These activities are perfect for primary but also secondary school students, and it can help them practice higher order thinking in a fun and engaging way. For example, question of the day journal. Encourage students to keep a question of the day journal at home. Each day, give them a fat question to answer in their journal. For younger students, allow them to draw pictures to express their answers and write a few words underneath. Family discussions. Assign a family discussion question for students to talk about at home. After discussing the question with the family, they can share what they talked about in class or write a short summary. For example, if you could travel anywhere in the world, where would you go and why? They don't need to conduct this discussion in English with the parents if the parents do not speak English. They may do it in their own language and then reflect their thoughts in English. Create a story from a picture. Give them a picture and ask them to create a story or answer a fat question based on the image. For example, what do you think is happening in this picture? This is a great way to spark imagination with practicing language skills. A fat question board game. Suggest that your students create a board game at home where players answer a fat question to move forward. They can play with their friends or with the family, making it a fun way to practice English. A daily reflection question. At the end of each day, ask your students to reflect on their day by answering a fat question. For example, what made you happy today? Why? This helps them practice using English in a personal and meaningful way. Explore the world with what-if questions. Give the students a what-if question to think about at home. These creative questions can help them explore different possibilities. For example, what if people could live on the moon? How would it be different from living on Earth? Create a video or audio response. Encourage students to respond to a question, to a fat question on video or recording an audio of themselves answering the question. This allows them to practice speaking in a low-pressure environment. Role-playing with friends or family. Suggest that they role-play scenarios with their friends or family members where they ask and answer fat questions in character. This is a fun way and a very interactive way to get them to think critically in English. You can make a fat question treasure hunt. Set up a question treasure hunt where each clue is a fat question. As students answer the questions, they get closer to finding the treasure. And this can be done at home with the help of family members. And create your own fat questions. Challenge the students to come up with their own fat questions. This helps them think critically about what makes a good question and encourages creativity. So, there you have it. We have covered a lot today, from understanding the difference between fat and skinny questions to exploring the power of divergent questions, also to helping students overcome the challenges, and even how they can practice answering fat questions outside the classroom. Remember, fat questions, especially divergent ones, are powerful tools to encourage critical thinking and deeper engagement in the EFL classroom. They not only improve language skills, but also help students develop important cognitive abilities. By giving students plenty of opportunities to practice, both in and out of class, you will help them become more confident and capable in their language use and thinking skills. As you move forward with using fat and divergent questions, remember that practice makes perfect, both for you in crafting effective questions and for your students in answering them. Don't be afraid to experiment and find what works for you in your unique classroom situation. So, thank you so much for tuning in. If you found this video helpful, don't you forget to like and subscribe. Hit the bell so that you don't miss any of my future postings. And if you have any questions, ideas, drop them in the comments below. If you want to learn more about this and other topics, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel, hitting on the bell to be notified when I post. And also, you can visit my web, anieltamirano.com, to learn about the services I provide and also to read my blog. Until next time, happy teaching and happy questioning. Bye.